I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
If the 80 years of the UN history have taught us anything, it is that multilateralism is the best guarantee for international peace and stability.
Preparing for a key month of diplomacy. China's ambassador outlines plans as the country assumes the Security Council presidency.
Any durable peace will require tangible, irreversible, and permanent progress toward the two-state solution.
What's next for Gaza and the Palestinian people after more than a year of conflict? The UN considers the way forward and responds to some controversial comments. Protecting fragile ecosystems and the people who rely on them. A look at a key restoration effort as we mark World Wetlands Day. Next.
The start of a new month means a new president of the UN Security Council. This month, China holds the seat. Its diplomats plan to address a number of issues with a special focus on multilateralism as the UN approaches its 80th anniversary. Ambassador Fu Tong outlined China's priorities. Jody Jacobs has the details.
An unfolding war in the Democratic Republic of Congo, to a fragile ceasefire in Gaza, and a devastating humanitarian situation in Haiti and Sudan. These are just some of the issues that will remain top of the agenda as China assumes the rotating presidency of the UN Security Council and encourages members to work together. China has long been a major advocate for the United Nations as a stage to promote multilateral talks for peace.
We all know that this year marks the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. And in our view, if the 80 years of the UN history have taught us anything, it is that multilateralism is the best guarantee for international peace and stability. So we believe that as the world enters a new period of turbulence, it is all the more important for countries to reaffirm their commitment to an international system with the UN at its core and to an international order based on international law. In particular, the principle of peaceful resolution of disputes.
The question of US-imposed tariffs on China couldn't have been avoided at Monday's press conference, with China's permanent representative saying there are no winners in a trade war.
We do hope that the US should look at its own problems, really find a solution that is beneficial not only to itself and also to the whole world. And frankly speaking, I don't think that raising tariffs is beneficial to the US itself.
Addressing journalists here in New York on Monday, Ambassador Fu Tong said that the United States and China can work together to solve many global problems. He says it is his role as China's top diplomat to the United Nations to build bridges between the two countries.
Again, I want to emphasize, despite of our political differences between our two countries, I think as diplomats, we need to be professional. I emphasize the word professional. And because there are issues that the diplomats, our mission is to build bridges. And I do hope that I can work with the new PR of the US in building bridges for our two countries, despite the political differences, or despite whatever political differences we may have. Our mission should be to minimize, not to expand, or not to create more differences.
China is expected to chair a Security Council open debate this month on multilateralism and improving global governance. As part of its role in heading the UN's principal body for maintaining international peace and security, China's ambassador was adamant that a resolution to the impasse in the DRC is another top priority. Jody Jacobs, CGTN, New York.
In Goma, we remain under occupation. The situation is still highly volatile, with a persistent risk of escalation.
Nearly 3,000 people have been confirmed dead after intense fighting in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. The M23 now control Goma and may be moving toward another major city. The UN says 21 million people needed assistance before the last round of fighting erupted. And those numbers are only growing. It's been nearly 3 weeks since the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas began. Hamas has released more than a dozen people taken hostage during the October 7th attacks. Israel has released several hundred Palestinian prisoners. With the fighting paused, more attention has shifted to the next phase of the ceasefire and Gaza's future.
In the search for solutions, we must not make the problem worse. It is vital to stay true to the bedrock of international law. It is essential to avoid any form of ethnic cleansing.
Secretary General Antonio Guterres reiterated his support for the establishment of a Palestinian state as he addressed the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. His comments came a day after the U.S. president triggered international outrage by calling for permanent resettlement of Gaza residents and a U.S. takeover of the enclave. Guterres says there must be a permanent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and a release of all hostages. He called on the international community to support humanitarian efforts and UNRWA, the UN aid agency for Palestinian refugees. And he says the two-state solution is essential for peace in the region.
We must reaffirm the two-state solution. Any durable peace will require tangible, irreversible, and permanent progress toward the two-state solution, an end to the occupation, and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with Gaza as an integral part. A viable sovereign Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel is the only sustainable solution for Middle East stability.
Some 47% of the global humanitarian appeal across the world last year, 47% of that was funded through the US government. That gives you an indication of how much it matters when we are in the situation we are in right now.
That's OCHA spokesperson Jens Larke on the potential of what could be deep cuts to humanitarian funding. The fate of the U.S. Agency for International Development, known as USAID, is in doubt. The new U.S. administration has frozen billions of dollars of humanitarian assistance pending a 90-day review. USAID employees have been told to stay home amid rumblings the agency could shut down completely. Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called on the White House to ensure delivery of critical development and humanitarian activities. UN agencies say the funding is a matter of life or death for many in need. Haiti's transitional government is targeting November for new elections, but security forces are still struggling to restore order. Another wave of violence in the Caribbean nation last week forced nearly 2,000 people from their homes. More than 1 million Haitians are currently displaced. A new report from the UN office in Haiti shows at least 5,600 people have been killed in the last year. That's an increase of more than 1,000 deaths compared to 2023's numbers. And the Secretary General's spokesperson highlighted special concern about young people in Haiti.
Coming up,
the tour guides are actually our ambassadors because they are the people that people will interact with.
UN Insider.
UN headquarters isn't just a landmark for diplomacy, it is also a tourist attraction. Visitors from around the world come here every day, and the UN has given guided tours since headquarters opened in 1952. Maher Nasser is the director of the Outreach Division in the UN's Department of Global Communications.
Maher, tell us about all the different kinds of tours the United Nations offers here in New York.
There's the standard tour, which usually is offered to people who want to know more about the United Nations. Many students take this tour. It's a tour that takes visitors to the General Assembly Hall, the Economic and Social Council, Trusteeship Council, and the Security Council. And of course, during that tour, they are told more about the work of the United Nations, the history of the organization, the role of the different councils and the General Assembly, the languages that are used, and of course, a lot about the work of the UN outside of this building, including information about some of the key issues on our agenda: human rights, the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course the peacekeeping and work that we do on that. We do similar tours in Vienna, in Geneva, and Nairobi, the other UN headquarters as well. We also do tours that are specialized for art tour. We do a garden tour that looks at the art that is in the North Lawn, a special tour that is focused on also the African history and the transatlantic slave trade, as well as a women-focused tour.
A lot of people have heard of the UN, they know what the UN does, they hear about what happens here every September when world leaders come for the UN General Assembly. But as you've described, there's so much more to the building, what the building contains, what you see on the outside. What is the biggest takeaway that you found from visitors?
I think much of that feedback I also get from our colleagues who actually do the guided tours. And many of them are impressed by the questions that people have. Sometimes people come already informed and they want to know more about a certain subject or another. Sometimes they will be asking tough questions, like they see something in the news and why hasn't the UN ended this war or that war or solved this problem or solved that crisis? But I mean, one of the things that they will see on the tour is that it is attributed to our Second Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, is that the United Nations was not created to take people to heaven. It was created to save them from hell. So this is part of the presentation, is that yes, there are many issues and problems in the world. We are trying our best to solve them. And when member states agree together, we succeed. When they do not agree, we do not succeed.
No doubt that for students who participate in Model UN and come here to visit, they really get a first-hand view of what it really looks like.
On average, I think anecdotal evidence tells us that about 500,000 students participate in a Model United Nations every year. That's quite a lot. And we have actually worked with Model United Nations. Some of them have their simulation here at the UN, or at least the opening session and the closing session. And those are the lucky ones, because they get to actually hold their Model UN in the General Assembly or in the Economic and Social Council.
This all could not be done without the tour guides. What makes a good tour guide?
The tour guides are actually our ambassadors, because they are the people that people will interact with. And they need to, first of all, be informed. So they have to have a good memory to remember. They're not going to be reading from a book or a pamphlet. They also need to be able to interact, take questions, tough ones and easy ones, with an open heart, be pleasant, multilingual. Because we offer the tours in the 6 official languages of the United Nations, which are English, French, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian, plus 7 other languages here in New York. And in other countries, we offer other languages as well.
What is the one thing that you hope people take away from their time walking around, meeting people, learning about how the United Nations works?
I think if there's only one thing, is that they can see this as the effort to achieve a world in which everyone thrives in peace, dignity, equality on a healthy planet. Now, whether or not we succeed depends on every one of us, and every one of us pushing their own leaders to commit to that goal. We cannot do it alone, and the UN is not isolated from the world around it. We have to ensure that we continue to work to ensure that leadership in the private sector as well as in government fulfills the commitments that are needed.
Director Maher Nasser, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up.
2 years ago, there was an island right there. It's gone now. We all know what's happening. We see what's happening every day.
UN Insider.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
Sunday marked World Wetlands Day. Wetlands cover around 6% of the Earth's land surface. The UN says since 1970, 35% of the world's wetlands have been lost. These vital ecosystems help safeguard 60% of people living along coastlines from storm surges, hurricanes, and tsunamis. Globally, around 1 in 8 people make their livelihoods from wetlands, supplying food and creating jobs. It's become a delicate balancing act along the Mississippi Delta in the U.S. Officials are looking for ways to preserve the wetlands while maintaining the livelihoods of people working the waters.
It's got many names. Native Americans call it the Father of Waters. The Mississippi is also called Old Man River, and by some, the Big Muddy, for all the sediment that flows south. It was this mud and sand that built the expansive Mississippi Delta, land that is sinking as surrounding waters rise.
My name is Captain George Ricks. I own and operate getaway fishing charters out of Hopedale, Louisiana. Slow down a little bit, Steve. You ain't fishing plastic now, you're fishing live bait. We catch a variety of saltwater species. But our target species, which is our number one, which attracts all of our recreational fishermen, is a speckled trout. Oh, yeah.
In his years on the water, he's seen Louisiana's delicate coastline wash away. By all accounts, this region is losing a football field worth of marshlands every 100 minutes.
Every year you come out, you see less and less land?
Oh, yeah. Well, right here, there was an island 2 years ago. There was an island right there. It's gone now. We all know what's happening. We see what's happening every day.
Let me ask you a bit about climate change. Do you think people down here have had their attitudes change in the last 15, 20 years about climate change?
Listen, I see it. We see it every day. We're out here every day, and everybody knows things are changing. You know, our hurricanes are getting more frequent and more powerful every year.
Shortly after this interview, Hurricane Ida hit the Louisiana coast hard. Its most punishing winds and storm surge sweeping through the very marshlands Ricks works. Scientists say it is climate change at its most devastating.
The river built the land that we're standing on, built New Orleans, built all of southern Louisiana, but we live on a river delta. And what river deltas do, geologically, is they sink over time. It's a natural process.
But there was nothing natural about the process that choked off the flow of sediment and fresh water from the Mississippi into the Delta some 80 years ago.
Just above New Orleans, Louisiana.
It was a series of dams and levees built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
The treatment, concrete paving for the levee.
Kimberly Davis-Rayer is with the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. The CPRA is pushing a plan to breathe new life into this sensitive area by something called sediment diversion.
New Orleans sits on the Mississippi River between Lake Pontchartrain and the Gulf of Mexico, what we call the Bird's Foot Delta. In years past, this river would overflow its banks in the spring and the fall, in the times when the water was high. And the water and sediment that flowed out of the river would build land, nourish the wetlands. When we leveed this river, we stopped that flow of sediment and water from the river into the wetlands.
So it basically choked off the potential growth.
Choked off the potential growth and essentially starved the wetlands from the water and the sediment that they need to be healthy, to thrive, to grow. The sediment diversion is planned for a spot 60 miles up the river, would simply reconnect the river to the adjacent wetlands. The idea is it'll be controlled, it'll be open when the river is high, when the river is most full of sediment, when it's most efficient to do this.
Diverting the Mississippi into the wetlands is the centerpiece of a $50 billion plan to restore Louisiana's coastline. It will help cope with the ills of climate change, since wetlands knock down a storm surge. The only reason the diversion plan is even on the table is the direct result of the BP Horizon disaster that claimed 11 lives and fouled much of the region with oil. $4 billion of BP settlement money is earmarked to restore the coastal wetlands. Alicia Renfro is a coastal scientist with the National Wildlife Federation, one of a host of environmental groups that is strongly backing the diversion plan.
You know, I think for a long time we've recognized that something needs to be done in Louisiana. The oil spill kind of highlighted what's happening in the Gulf Coast, but particularly in Louisiana. And so I think most people, it just makes sense when you talk about the river built this landscape. The river is the only thing that is going to sustain it for the long term.
They're talking about, at best, in 50 years, building 13,000 acres. That's a spot on the map about this big. That'll do nothing for this area here. We're going to continue to lose land, even with the diversion. But what it will do, it will eliminate our resources.
Ricks is among those fighting the state's big plans to save the wetlands. People who make a living on the water say by upsetting the delicate balance, there's the risk of destroying the environment that is so important for fishing, crabbing, shrimpers, and oystermen.
This is Granal, and we're going to go look at a oyster farm.
A few years ago, oysterman Boris Guerrero bet big on setting up his oyster farm. The water here has been perfect to grow a juicy, tasty oyster.
Let's do a taste test. Delicious. The salinity went up.
But the state's plan to divert the Mississippi is leaving a bad taste in his mouth.
Let's take that to its logical conclusion. If indeed they open this up and pump in a lot of fresh water, what is it going to do to you and other oystermen down here in Grand Isle?
It's going to wipe us out. I mean, the oysters are not going to like it around here. I mean, it's going to be too fresh for them. You know, you need a certain salinity for oysters to survive. And maybe if they do survive, how much percent of the year will have oyster that has no taste, for example? It's really a bad a bad scenario either way you see it. I hope not.
Let's pick one. We'll let you have a try, okay?
And there's one more variable at play. The tourism industry really keeps New Orleans afloat in many ways. Richard Hughes has owned and operated the famed Pelican Club in the French Quarter for more than 30 years. Losing the flavor of the Gulf, he says, will hit the tourism industry hard.
I think it would be catastrophic. I really do. I'd put all these fisheries out of business and then expect them to come back when they turn the switch on again. That's not a really realistic scenario.
Some $300 million is set aside for what's called mitigation, helping shrimpers, fishermen, and others financially deal with the changes caused by diversion.
It's a culture and a heritage. What price do you put on that? You know, you can't put a price on generations of what they've done.
It's not simple. This is really complicated. It's messy. There are a lot of people involved. There are real concerns. This is going to cause challenges for certain people, and it's really important we recognize that.
Above all, supporters of the plan come back to one key argument. Do nothing, and all this eventually washes away.
I would say embrace the opportunity. We need to look at this as a chance for Louisiana to lead, a chance for us to find a way to live here safely, even if it means some change. And also, it's important that we all recognize status quo is not an option. Things are going to change. We need to decide how we want them to change.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN Insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is a special edition of UN Insider.
UN Insider serves as an important window for the global audience to better understand multilateral diplomacy.
It's very important for the media to cover the United Nations, to seek to understand and tell the story in ways that the average person in the street can understand.
I think it's very important that the media should contribute to conveying important messages about the reality of today's challenges.
UN Insider has come to the UN, and we at the UN are so grateful to have it here. It is the only dedicated TV program to what is happening in the UN, and it is reaching so many people with, as it says in its title, inside the UN stories.
Media plays an important role in providing objective information across the world.
We think that media has a strong power of uplifting, what we are trying to convey as messages as developing countries.
We need the mobilization of all peoples, of whole government and whole of society, and media can help us to be informed so that we also can make our point.
I think the media is fundamental to enable citizens across the world, first of all, to understand what is the rationale of having the United Nations. It's not that there is one place on planet Earth that will tell the rest of the world what to do. It is a much more complex story.